Hello, welcome to this AWS partner webinar. My name's Ian Massingham. I'm a technical evangelist with Amazon Web Services based here in Europe, and I'm going to be your host for today's session. This is the second in our partner webinar series that we're running here in Europe at the moment. The first webinar focused on the different partner models that we have here at AWS, the different programs. And if you missed that webinar, you can check it out from the YouTube link that you can see in the links panel within the webinar interface right now. So do rewatch that if you didn't see it. It'll just give you an overview of what the different partnering opportunities are with AWS. Also within the webinar interface, you should be able to see a couple of other things. At the top there, you should see a Q&A panel. If you have questions during today's session, please submit them through that Q&A panel. Not going to do live Q&A today because we're somewhat limited in time that we have for this session, but we're going to follow up any questions that are submitted in email within the next few days. So don't be shy. If you've got any questions about partnering with AWS, about TCO, about any other topics, please do submit those. You can also see several other useful links in the links panel that you may want to take a look at, and we'll touch upon a couple of those during the session today. And then at the bottom of the interface in the files panel, you can download there a PDF of the materials from today's session. So if you do want to grab hold of the materials to refer to offline or to share with colleagues, please download that PDF at your leisure and do that. Okay, that's enough housekeeping. Let's get on with the session. And today we're focusing on how you can drive TCO discussions with your customers and help them understand what the potential benefits of moving their IT applications, workloads and other services to the AWS cloud could be. And in the session today, we're going to cover three topics in order to do that. We're going to introduce you to some important concepts related to TCO on AWS. We're going to provide you with a methodology to conduct TCO analysis, taken for some real-world examples, and also share with you a tool that you can use to automate TCO analysis of services that you're considering migrating to AWS on behalf of customers. And then lastly, we're going to share some best practice, some do's and don'ts for TCO modeling and analysis generally and specifically with AWS too. And at the end of the webinar today, you should be able to initiate and drive meaningful TCO conversations around AWS services with your customers. Start by taking a look at a definition. What is TCO? What is total cost of ownership? Well, TCO is modeling total cost of ownership, so acquisition and operating costs for running an IT infrastructure environment, along with the future costs of decommissioning and retiring that environment in the future when it reaches the end of its life. So that's what we consider a definition of TCO. And why does this matter to customers, partners, and to AWS? Well, from customers' perspective, it's very simple. It's common practice and good practice to consider alternative options and scenarios when buying IT. You want to make sure that you're getting the best value and most cost-optimal option when you are delivering IT services, and then you're not overspending or wasting your company's precious financial resources, be that capital or operational expenditure. So it's the obvious role of customers to try and optimize cost. And it's often the duty of a partner, an AWS partner, to advise customers on their purchasing choices. So there's definitely a role for AWS partners in helping customers understand what their TCO could and will be. Secondly, you can add to that the fact that the AWS offering is an alternative for existing, I guess you could call them traditional on-premises systems or other traditional options like buying or leasing hardware and placing it in a co-location facility to operate your apps. And the AWS services portfolio is innovative. It includes new services that customers are not always familiar with and may not necessarily compare like for like with those traditional alternatives that I've just mentioned. So there's a role there for AWS and partners in educating customers about those differences and about how AWS offers a better way to do IT as a result of that innovation. Thirdly, it's really AWS's responsibilities to provide tools that help partners and actually customers conduct and understand accurate TCO analysis for their applications, workloads and services. So we're going to show you during the session today a tool that we have provided that can help you do that. That's one of the key goals for the session today, really, to provide you with the tools that you need to conduct effective TCO analyses for your customers. And those TCO analyses are typically used for three things. Firstly, to compare the costs of running an entire infrastructure environment versus on-premises or in a co-location facility. That's one thing you might want to do a TCO analysis for. Secondly, you might want to compare the costs of underlying infrastructure for a specific application or workload. So you're going to look at one particular app and you want to assess the costs of running that app on AWS, that workload on AWS against traditional delivery models. And thirdly, you might want to build a business case for a much larger whole-scale migration to AWS. And that, again, can be an important process within which TCO modeling, TCO analysis can be extremely useful. Some of the influences and structural barriers that you might face. The first and maybe most important thing that we're going to focus on repeatedly in terms of TCO analysis processes is engagement. So it's important to get a complete picture of TCO within an organization. And in order to do that, you may have to engage with several different audiences, and you may have to have multiple discussions with those audiences in order to tease out the true facts about what the cost environment, what the cost structure of IT in a particular organization is like, what it represents. And some of the people that you might end up talking to, developers and other technical end users, so understanding the costs associated with development operations or DevOps if they've merged those things together, the costs of existing release cycles, maybe waterfall or agile release cycles, or even continuous delivery and release cycles that they may be using. And of course, the costs of making a change to a new environment. The AWS environment will feature in that. Maybe talk to support people, IT support people, understand what the changes will be that they will have to make to support this new cloud environment and what the potential costs of those change will be. You'll very likely to talk to procurement teams, supplier management, cost management professionals who are interested in ROI and pricing. And for these guys, it can be challenging to understand the shift from buying hardware through a predominantly capital model with its traditional 3 to 5 year refresh cycle versus the pay-as-you-go model that AWS offers, this capital-free model where you pay for the amount of resources you're using as you consume them. It is a bit of a change, and there's some education required there to help procurement professionals understand how and why this is different. And then lastly, in the C-suite, in the C-level, the CFO, the CIO, potentially the investors in organizations, they're interested in ROI, profitability, the bottom line fundamentally, and also how they can use this new technology to grow their business, increasing their revenues and increasing their margins. So you'll have a different conversation depending upon which of those constituencies you engage with, and they'll all have different perspectives on TCO as well. So it's very helpful to be pre-armed with that and to understand what the different motivational factors and what the different perspectives are going to be before you start having these discussions. How can AWS offer customers lower TCO than traditional infrastructure? And there's really 4 different components to this. The first is, we've already touched upon it, the obvious conversion of CapEx into OpEx. The fact that you no longer have this capital intensive 3 to 5 year IT refresh cycle that you're locked into. You can replace that with a lower variable cost model where you are consuming the amount of resources that you require at any particular point in time, and you are paying for that resource consumption on a utilitized basis. And we see customers do quite large-scale replacements of traditional infrastructure with AWS. In this IDC paper, which we're going to talk about more in a second on the next slide, the customers that were sampled there replaced on average 400 servers per customer when they adopted AWS. So you can see very significant CapEx mitigation and conversion of that CapEx into operational expenditure. Second thing you can see is economies of scale delivered by AWS that allow us to continually lower costs and pass those cost reductions on to customers very proactively. The way we do this is obviously by listening to customers about which services they want us to develop and build and launching those services. And then if we've done the right thing and we've got those that feedback closely aligned to what we've delivered, we generally see customers start to adopt those services, sometimes at a spectacular rate. And when those customers do begin to adopt services, it drives volume on our platform. That volume allows us to optimize our supply chain, optimize our infrastructure, optimize our technology, optimize our resourcing model. And by doing that, we can offer lower unit cost, achieve lower unit cost per unit of capacity delivered. And rather than keeping that for ourselves, we pass those lower unit costs directly onto customers in the form of price reductions, which helps us acquire more customers, which in turn helps us scale the platform, which gives us further optimization opportunities, which we then pass straight onto customers again and scale up further. And that's a sort of flywheel that we try to spin here at AWS and pass that success effectively directly onto our customers in the form of lower costs. And by doing that, we've lowered prices a dramatic number of times since we launched our first service back in 2006. Over 42 price reductions we've managed to achieve now, some of them very substantive. In April this year, we reduced the cost of our Amazon EC2 computing instances by between 40 and 60%. So customers on day one, the last day of March, might have been paying $100 a month on the 1st of April, immediately from that point forward, they might be paying between $40 and $60 per month. And the customers don't have to take action to benefit from that. It just flows through to them in the form of reduced bills. So it's very, very accessible price reductions and very frequent. Thirdly, we have pricing model choice. So you can optimize your costs by using different pricing models. If you have a unpredictable workload which is highly variable, you might use on-demand capacity for that, just paying for your instances, your other resources by the hour on the basis of how much capacity you're using. If you know that your workload's going to be static for a year or 3 years, you can reserve those EC2 instances or capacity on other services. That will reduce your unit cost, reduce your hourly rate. And in fact, if you reserve an EC2 instance for 3 years, typically see your hourly cost for that instance drop by anything up to 70% per hour. So you're getting a very, very significant cost reduction. You're paying only 30% of what you might have paid if you'd used that resource on demand. So if you can reserve, you can use that as a really good mechanism for cost optimization. At the other end of the spectrum, if you have highly variable workloads that can benefit from large amounts of additional capacity, then you can use the spot market for that, bidding at prices that are normally between 15 and 25% of the on-demand price, accessing capacity for short periods of time, but it's non-guaranteed capacity, so it can be claimed back by other customers if they bid more than you and the price rises, or customers demand it for on demand. We can retrieve it from you and reuse it, but it can still help you accelerate the delivery of certain non-time sensitive workloads, or run large scale high performance computing or HPC jobs with very good economics, which might literally unlock workloads that weren't previously economically viable. So you can take a look at spot as an optimization technique. And lastly, dedicated. If you want to trade slightly higher cost for non-multi-tenant hardware, so you'll be the only people running on the hardware that underpins your instances, you can use the dedicated instance type for that. It's useful for certain compliance requirements. So you can optimize against cost and in favor of compliance if you wish to do that as well. So several pricing model options there for you. Lastly, volume discounting and volume breaks. So if you look in the links panel, you'll see a link to a YouTube video featuring one of the leadership team from a company called Flipboard, who have a really innovative online magazine app which turns content on the internet into something that looks like a paper magazine, but it's delivered to you on a tablet, Android or iOS tablet. Looks great, and have an awful lot of users because of the good user experience that they offer. In this video, they're talking about the way in which their cost per user has fallen away over time as a result of them building their application on AWS. So a combination of price reductions, which we touched upon, plus volume discounting has led them to reduce their cost per user dramatically over the lifetime of their service. And they talk about some metrics in the video, and show you some metrics in the video which are pretty stunning. I won't spoil the surprise, but it's a pretty big cost optimization effect that they've managed to achieve. Their per user cost per month very heavily optimized as a result of that volume discounting. The more AWS capacity you use, the less the cost per unit will be to you. So if you're using a significant amount of S3 capacity, you will pay significantly less than a customer that is using only a small amount. So we're passing volume discounts through to customers in the form of price breaks, and you can find the full details on that on the pricing page for every AWS service that it's relevant to. The breaks will be listed publicly for you to take a look at. So for example, you can take a look at the S3 pricing page as an example for that and just get a feel for how volume discounting might affect you. So those four things combine to offer customers lower TCO when using AWS versus traditional on-premises IT. And it's not just us that are saying this. This has been validated by third parties. There's a large study that was done by IDC back in 2012, 2013, where they talk about the effects of using AWS in real-world migration and deployment scenarios for IT applications. Okay, a range of customers, various sizes and from various segments, but they've got some good average data there. And that's summarized in the report. You can access the report by clicking on the link that you can see in the slide there. And if you download the materials from this webinar, as I've said, in PDF format from the files panel that you can see in the webinar interface, you can grab the slides, click that link and read that IDC report for yourself. So you don't necessarily have to take our word for it. You know, there's plenty of independent research which validates the fact that customers do save money by using AWS, and they save money over the long term by doing it. There are some challenges, of course, in discussing TCO, and customers will have some challenges with TCO when assessing the TCO of the cloud. And it's worthwhile being open about those and just quickly discussing them. So we're going to be focusing today principally on developing a credible IT cost baseline for comparison. So looking at what customers already have and comparing that against the comparative TCO of running those applications or services on AWS. So that's what we're focusing on today. But some of the other challenges that you might find are migration challenges, the fact that customers need to move their workloads from traditional IT onto the AWS cloud in order to get these benefits. Also the fact that organizations, as we've said, are shifting to an all OPEX model. So they may need to replan aspects of their finance and engage with financial stakeholders to do that. They're going to have less CapEx in their business. And some organizations are heavily orientated around CapEx expenditure. So those organizations need to be led through that. You might have organizations that feel they're not ready for the cloud. They don't have the skills or the right culture to get the benefits that the cloud could offer them. And lastly, you might have an IT organization which is averse to change, and doesn't want to go through this process. And I think all four of those things are things that actually AWS partners can really help customers with. You can really help customers with expertise for migration and expertise for that lack of cloud readiness to upskill or knowledge transfer into customers and enable them to do this stuff either for themselves or with long-term support from partners. You can educate customers about how they can change their business model and shift their CapEx into OPEX and what the potential benefits of that could be. And of course, you can work with those change-averse IT departments to show them there's a better way to do this stuff and that it just changes what IT will be doing over the long term rather than removing the need for IT. It actually takes off some of the burdensome, undifferentiated heavy lifting that IT departments get bogged down in, allows them to free up some of their valuable thinking time and operational time to focus on delivering a better outcome for their organization. And most IT people, when they understand that, are happy to accept it and move forward. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for partners in guiding customers through some of these challenges and helping them get through them. Let's move on now and talk about our TCO methodology here at AWS. A little bit of this requires that you morph your brain or reboot your brain into accountancy mode. Okay, so I'm going to look at a few examples of numbers and models here. But the first thing to say is TCO, it's acquisition costs plus operations cost, as we've already said. And you have to go wide in order to get a full picture of what all those costs will be. Quite often, some of these costs will be held by different budget holders in organizations or reported somewhere else. The yellow stuff particularly here, the facilities costs, it's often difficult for people in IT to fully quantify those. And that's why you may need to have a quite broad set of stakeholders involved in your TCO modeling projects, because some of these costs could be outside the IT department and held somewhere else. But of course, you've got all the stalwarts of server storage and network plus IT labor that your customers in the IT departments should have a good knowledge of, or at least be able to get a good knowledge of. The stuff that's facility related, to simplify this, we model this on a per rack, per month basis because it can be relatively hard to identify. And the way we do that is to use assumptive calculations for on-premises infrastructure and for co-location. Now, co-location in some ways, where customers don't have their own facilities, it can be easier to identify these costs because they're going to have invoices or billing relationships with providers, and they're going to have visibility of what their power and cooling costs are as well as their floor space, because that'll be either itemized on their co-location bills or represented as a bundled charge. It can also be easier to identify bandwidth costs in co-location environments because they rarely contain, for example, voice over IP infrastructure for doing voice over LANs. They rarely contain end-user computing, desktop computing environments, so the network environment can be discrete and therefore quite easy to calculate the cost of for specific workloads or sets of infrastructure. Contrast this with on-premises, where the situation can be a little more complex. You may not have good visibility of what power and cooling or data center facility depreciation costs are within an on-premises environment. And you may have multi-tenancy or sharing of the network, which can again make it slightly harder to identify what the real costs of delivering network services are. So you just need to be cognizant of that, be aware of it, and try to get as many stakeholders involved in this process so you can get a picture of those costs. In our model, we use these assumptions to enable us to model on-premises and co-location facility costs. I'm not going to walk through these and read the slide to you, but I would just say that when we show you a tool in a second, these are the numbers that are being used in that tool. Of course, the tool allows you to modify these. It's pluggable. You can extract from the tool and use a different set of numbers if you wish. But we think these are good assumptions, and these are in line with industry benchmarks for these different kinds of facilities and these different kinds of delivery models, co-location or on-premises delivery models. By way of an example, here's a quick look at a 3-tier web application and the cost modeling for that 3-tier web application of on-premises versus AWS. And the application that we've used is represented as follows. So application serving 10,000 page views per day, 3 web servers, 3 app servers, 2 caching servers, a load balancer, a high availability DB server, 100 gigs of storage and 300 gigs of data transfer per month. And we modeled this using a tool that we're going to show you in a second. And this was the effect of that model. So running this on premises, we believe has a cost of around about $110,000 over 3 years. Moving that to AWS, you're looking at a 65% reduction in costs down to $38,471 over that 3-year period. And then after our recent price drop, our 40-second price drop, you're looking at $26,786 to run that over 3 years. So 65% lower pre-price cut and then a further 30% reduction following the price reduction. So very substantial savings available for this particular application by migrating it to AWS. And these numbers have been developed using a tool that we provide. And this is a public access tool, so you can use this tool to model and calculate TCO for workloads for prospective customers or for yourself. And you can access the tool at this particular URL. Once again, download the materials and you can just click through to that URL, but it's AWS TCO Calculator.com. If you go there, you will find the tool. There's full usage instructions within the tool which show the assumptions. You can download the model once you've created it and work on the model offline. So it's an excellent tool to use for TCO modeling and TCO calculation. Very accessible, very simple to use, and something that can be done collaboratively with a customer. We're going to talk about that collaborative approach more in a couple of minutes. Finish up with some best practices and a short quiz. So here are some best practices, some do's and don'ts. So do understand that the TCO message is part of the overall AWS message. It shouldn't be treated in isolation. There are a lot of benefits from using the AWS cloud beyond lower cost and better TCO. Things like agility, risk mitigation, the ability to operate a platform which is flexible, agile, very scalable, offers good availability characteristics, programmatically controlled, and works with existing management tools. There's a lot of benefits around AWS. TCO is part of that, but it's not the whole picture. And it's important to focus not only on cost reduction, but also on benefits delivery. Try and take a holistic view of the overall benefits case for migrating or running new workloads on the AWS platform. It makes for a much richer conversation with customers, and there's a lot of value there that customers appreciate and want to talk about and understand. TCO comparisons are most effective if built collaboratively with customers in multiple iterations. Okay, so get those stakeholders, and we'll come to this in a second, but get the right people together and iterate across the model. As you refine the model, identify or uncover more information, you'll be able to make the TCO calculation more accurate and more representative of the reality of cost savings, the reality of running this prospective workload or application on AWS. So make sure that you iterate across that and that you do that with the engagement, full engagement of the customers that are involved in it. And in the same direction of full engagement, it's the right stakeholders. Have those 4 or 5 different roles that need to be involved, from finance, procurement, IT support, engineering or development. If you need to get those facilities, those property people in the room and understand costs of power, cooling, cost of depreciation on the facilities, make sure you have the stakeholders that give you that complete picture. You can collaborate with those stakeholders across those multiple iterations and deliver that complete value message to them. Things that you should not do. So don't focus purely on pricing and discounting. Make sure that you understand a comparative TCO. You're making a decision here about something that already exists or is going to exist with a set of different delivery options, and you want to compare that against AWS and illustrate that there is a total cost of ownership benefit and a set of other benefits in delivering this particular application or workload using AWS. It's not purely about the unit cost of particular resource types, and neither should it be. Don't necessarily compare a duplicate of an on-premises environment. Make sure that you're engaging the right solutions architects from your organization if you've got the expertise, or from AWS if you're still developing it. Make sure that you have an architecture for the customer's application or environment which is cost optimized and also optimized across other vectors that are important to this particular customer. So you've got the right target environment that can deliver those additional benefits, and it will also ensure that the TCO is competitive rather. So don't necessarily compare a duplicate. Don't allow all decisions and vision to be based on an unchecked TCO analysis from one person. So this is again back to that point about broad stakeholder engagement, collaboration and iteration. You want to make sure that you've got a full picture of the costs that you're able to make your comparisons against, and that will involve talking to multiple people within the customer organization, having what you and I would consider a full and complete understanding of that cost structure. You're not going to get that from one person, so bear that in mind, that you're going to have to potentially roam around to uncover the right information. And then finally, don't leave TCO till the 11th hour in your project. Make sure that it's a discussion, a topic that is on the table up front and is brought up early in the decision-making process, not late. And I think the reasons for that are very self-explanatory, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time educating you on that, but it's good to have these things out at the beginning of the process so you can iterate across them and obviously lead the customer through those benefits. Okay, let's move on now and take a quick look at a few quiz questions. Then we're going to show you a couple of resources at the end. So just to check some knowledge. An uptick in AWS spend is usually a trigger for either a TCO analysis, an RI or reserved instance analysis, or a cost optimization analysis. And this is an uptick in an existing spend. So it's definitely not a TCO analysis, because that is something that you're going to use up front to model the potential costs of running an application or service on AWS. So you're well past that at the point, should be well past that at the point at which you're seeing spend variations. And RIs, it's part of the picture, but it's very narrow, okay? Reserved instances only apply to EC2, and it assumes that you're going to keep everything running that you've already got running, or at least a substantive proportion of it. So the correct answer is C, a cost optimization analysis, and that is a broad analysis of the customer's environment, working with solutions architecture support potentially to identify opportunities for cost optimization in the holistic sense. And if you want to know more about that, we've got a Journey Through the Cloud webinar that we recorded this year for customers that talks about TCO optimization, 10 or so different techniques that you might use to optimize cost on AWS. So it's a broad subject. We've already got some materials that you might find useful to take a look at. We'll pop those in the links panel for today's webinar, and you can take a look at those once we finish up today. We'll leave the webinar open after we finish, so you can take a look at that cost optimization webinar if that's interesting to you. Question 2, TCO Conversations Are Ideal once a customer has started the migration process. Of course it's false. We've already discussed that there are many reasons that you want to do this upfront, so that you can set realistic expectations, make the right estimates, and have transparency of costs before the customer makes a decision to move to AWS, and then use that for benefits analysis once they've started to do so. So it's definitely something that needs to be done up front, and not something that should be left to the point at which a customer has already started a migration. Finally, TCO conversations are primarily had with the finance or CFO team. Of course, this is also false. We've already said again, stakeholder breadth and having the right people engaged in this process is key. You need to have those stakeholders. They're all going to be impacted ultimately, and their inputs and alignment with the TCO model that you're developing is essential to gain that buy-in that you need. So if you do that, you'll get stronger adoption and also stronger commitment from the customers that you're working with. So it's definitely not something that should be restricted to finance. So have the broadest constituency of different stakeholders involved in the process. It'll assure success if you do that. Okay, so that concludes what we have for you today in terms of content. As I said, we're going to leave this webinar open for a few minutes now, so the interface will be available for you, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, Q&A. If you have questions that you wish to ask, whether it's about TCO or about something else related to partnering with AWS, please fire those questions off in the Q&A panel. We're not going to answer them live because we're running out of time for the session, but we will come back to you in email after the session within the next few days and give you a response. So do ask any questions that you had. We'd love to have them. We'd also love to have your feedback. So even if you're not asking a question, you can send us a question with some feedback. It helps us optimize these sessions, make sure that they're useful for future customers and partners that might attend them. On point of feedback, you can also score us, as we said earlier, I think. So there's a rating box that may have appeared on your screen or will appear on your screen in a second. You can score this webinar from 1 to 5. 5 is the best. Please be honest. We'd love to have your ratings as well. And once again, that helps us understand whether the content we're delivering is appropriate for the audience that are attending today. If you want to keep up to date with AWS, follow us at AWS_UKI for local news and events here in the UK. Stay up to date with the webinar programs that we run more broadly. Also stay up to date with AWS in-person events that we're running around the UK and Ireland. You can follow us at AWS Cloud on Twitter for global AWS news and announcements, new services, updates on reInvent, which is upcoming in November if you want to come along to AWS reInvent, our global user education event. You can find more details about that at reinvent.awsevents.com if you're interested. It's in Las Vegas in the middle of November, as I've said. Super place to meet AWS customers, and of course, lots and lots of other partners will be there as well. And lastly, you can find me on Twitter at Ian if you want to keep up to date with what the evangelists at AWS are up to here in the UK and Ireland and elsewhere around Europe. You can find me there, also sharing information about AWS user groups and other opportunities for engagement with the AWS community more generally. So it's quite a good place to go for user group updates as well. And lastly, don't forget to download the materials from the session. If you want to grab the materials, they'll be available in the files panel as well for the next 10 or 15 minutes or so while we leave the webinar open. We're out of time there at the 30-minute mark, so I'd just like to thank you for joining us today. We'll leave the webinar open and hope to see you on the next session when that comes up. Thank you. Bye-bye.